immigration for the first time a truly national issue at the local scale. So it was impacting a much wider range of communities. Since the 2000s, since the mid-2000s, we've seen some interesting trends. The first is we've seen decreasing flows of immigrants from Mexico. Some of this is bound up with the Great Recession. Some of it is bound up with the changing demographics of Mexico, increasing levels of education. But by late 2013, there were more Americans moving to Mexico than there were Mexicans trying to come to the U.S. And that trend has held, despite what we'll get to in a minute what Trump thinks about this. But this has been a trend that doesn't appear to be changing, and it has not that much to do with U.S. border policies. It's much more bound up with changing demographics in Mexico, changing labor markets there as well. Since the kind of since 2010, not only have we seen this changing nature of immigrant flows, but we've also seen some very rapid changes in the politics of immigration. It's hard to remember, but if you think back to right after the 2012 presidential election, had headlines like this, where a lot of right-wing pundits flipped their position. In 2013, there was significant hope for comprehensive immigration reform. That had disappeared by fall 2013. In summer 2014, we started to see the arrival of unaccompanied minors from Central America. That again rapidly changed the politics of immigration. And then in summer 2014, Trump enters the race and made immigration an issue in a way that it really should not have been demographically, right? The numbers were starting to trail off. But in July 2015, Trump talks about that Mexico sends its worst elements, rapists, drug runners. The U.S. needed a beautiful wall between the U.S. and Mexico, paid for by Mexico, to solve the problem of immigration, and that infectious disease was pouring over the border. So let's look a little bit at what Trump, the candidate, had to say about immigration. And the key take-home point here is he is, in fact, following through on his campaign claims in a lot of ways. So, of course, Trump's slogan was "Make America Great Again," which is another way of saying that immigration has made America bad. For Trump, there are key words associated with immigration: alien, criminals, this idea of criminality. He talked a lot about wanting immigration reform that put the needs of working people, and he means working Americans, first. He really identified free trade and immigration as the two things that had undermined a middle-class lifestyle. One of the things he hasn't gotten to yet, but that he made claims about as a candidate, is to push to end birthright citizenship. So that could be something that we're going to see down the road. So how does Trump think about immigration? And Trump not only really legitimated racist claims about immigrants, a whole lot of other groups, but most importantly, he legitimated the ability to make claims with no basis in empirical reality. He is fundamentally a bad social science. I always say, if my little freshmen in my class made some of these claims in their papers, I would fail them. But, maybe I'm just failing the future president, I don't know it. So one of the tightest things we see in Trump's rhetoric is this link between immigrants and crime. And there is a huge body of research across the social sciences that has refuted this claim in all sorts of ways. In fact, what we see is that neighborhoods that have higher foreign-born populations have lower crime rates than would be predicted based on the socioeconomic standing of those neighborhoods. So there's a lot of evidence here that really challenges this link. But what Trump has done is he's legitimated claims about an entire group through the behavior of a handful of individuals, right? So if one person has done this, we can damn the whole group. And this is just analytically dangerous. When you think about social policy, we need to think about it at the aggregate scale. The other thing we see are these claims about immigrants pouring in from Mexico. And again, the numbers just don't back this up. Mexicans remain the largest immigrant group, but from 2009 to 2014, more left than arrived. Mexico itself is policing its border with Guatemala in all sorts of ways, but this language of pouring does a lot of political work, right? It taps into these historically deep stories and languages about floods and hordes of immigrants coming to the country. So he's using language that has done a lot of political work, and sort of tapping into those long-standing fears of immigrants sort of overwhelming the native-born population. The other thing we see is this very strong link between immigrants and security threats. And so you'll see this in some of what Gladys will talk about in a few minutes. You know, the travel ban made strong references to 9/11. Almost all the policies, the executive orders make this link between foreign nationals and crime. And again, there's just not evidence to back this up. So I can never remember this. I'm going to read to you the vetting process for refugees. So if you want to come to the U.S. as a refugee, there are 8 U.S. government agencies involved, 6 security databases, 5 separate background checks, 4 biometric security checks, 3 separate in-person interviews, and 2 interagency security reviews. That's quite a lot of vetting. Since 9/11, the U.S. has resettled almost 800,000 refugees. 3 have been arrested for terroristic activities. All 3 are referenced in the travel ban, right? So again, they're sort of pulling these individual instances and making them proxy for the whole group. The final thing is that Trump has done amazing political work in terms of what immigration causes and represents. So immigration has become the thing that explains the challenges that especially white working class Americans are facing. So it's not you lost your job because of automation or because of a global race to the bottom in terms of wages or because of outsourcing or because of policies that favor the top 1% rather than you. It's you lost your job because immigrants are coming in. And that is a much more simplistic explanation. It's also one that has a very clear answer, right? And so immigrants and immigration have come to kind of proxy for all of these other forces. And you know, and Trump also took that sense of being left out, of not mattering, of your views don't count in the contemporary era, and he linked that to immigration as well. And so he did, to be honest, a much better job than the left did of creating a powerful narrative about how to understand immigration. So I'm going to stop there and hand it off to Gladys, who's going to talk more about the executive orders.
Good. So a couple things. First off, I'm a history professor, so I'm used to working with things in the past. So when I sort of signed up to do the executive orders, it's disconcerting because it feels like every day there's new stuff. And as a historian, I'm just like, wow, it's just supposed to stay put. So I just want to preface that. And then also to let you know that I did a little bit of snafu. I updated all my slides, but the version that I sent Amy didn't contain them. So things are going to be a little bit off kilter, but we'll work with it for the most part. It should be good. But as Jamie said, there's been 4 different executive orders that relate to immigration, and the latest one was just this past week. So this is why I start like kind of sweating a little bit. But so all 4 of them reflect Trump's vision as Jamie's really outlined it, but specifically they also reflect the fact that within the Trump administration there are a series of very hardline immigration rights activists. And these are individuals such as Jeff Sessions, who's the Attorney General, Stephen Miller, who's one of the White House advisors, who's recently been in the news, and even Kellyanne Conway. All these individuals have at various points sort of moonlighted or worked with some of the think tanks that are really sort of proposing very strict immigration policies and are sort of proposing, sort of putting restrictions on how many immigrants are coming into the United States. So these sort of executive orders are visions of these individuals in there. So the first one that I want to spend some time on is the 2 executive orders that were released on January 25th. And both of them are sort of related to external and internal security issues. And I think the first one in particular is the one that I want to spend time on, in part because this is the one that's really kind of being carried out today. And this is the one that's really causing the most apprehension among both undocumented and even documented immigrants in the United States because of what it stands for. So as Jamie mentioned, there's always this language of the fact that as immigrants, we are a threat to national security. And I should tell you that I am an immigrant. I'm originally from Costa Rica in Central America, and I went through the whole immigration process, coming here as a foreign student. I went to bilingual schools all my life, that's the English. But you know, I came here as a foreign student, had an H-1 work visa, and then eventually got my permanent residency, and then became a U.S. citizen a few years ago. So this is part of the reason why I do this, is because I actually sort of was on the front lines of it, and it sucked. It's actually a pretty broken system, to be honest. But so this one is the one that even for me as a legal immigrant really kind of puts the heebie-jeebies in me, and I'll tell you why. In part because the language of this executive order, here you have one quote from it, but it poses immigration as a, quote, clear and present danger. So it's something that's very urgent, and it really sort of stands as a threat to the United States. And that sort of smacks in the face of what many immigrants, such as myself, feel that we have actually contributed to this country. So one of the things that this policy has done is basically over the course of the last few months, you've seen more than double the amount of people, undocumented individuals who are being deported as of right now. So it's not just the bad hombres, to use Trump's words, it's actually even legal, like people who sort of legally tried to sort of do their best being in this country despite the fact that they didn't have papers. This is the executive order that has the wall built into it. And some of you may know that come Friday, the government may shut down, in part because Trump wants to get the money. Right now, the Department of Homeland Security only has about $20 million allocated to building the wall. They estimate that we need about $22 billion to build the wall. And as you can imagine, Mexico ain't gonna pay for it. So it's gonna be the United States taxpayer who's gonna pay for it. So they're kind of coming to a head, and it's been wedded, and perhaps Chris will talk about this, it's been wedded to the fact that if you don't let the funding for the wall go through, we're not going to let the funding for Obamacare go through. So it's been sort of tied to this, hence why we may actually face a government shutdown over the wall. So this is actually something that's happening this week in particular. So right now, the border between the U.S. and Mexico is about 2,000 miles from the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico. We have about 632 miles of wall that has already been built in some of these key areas. The remainder includes rivers, mountains, territory that's actually going to require eminent domain to sort of retrieve and build the wall. So it's an engineer's nightmare. But they're currently taking bids for building the wall, and it's expected that construction will begin in September. So this is really sort of moving forward, to say the least, despite the fact that everybody and their grandmother is saying that it is not the best use of our money, to say the least, in part because I think more than half of immigrants who do come undocumented into the United States do so by other means than crossing the border. They come here on tourist visas, for example, and overstay their welcome. So at the end of the day, is this really the best use of $20+ billion? And I should mention that you almost have about $1 billion per year just in upkeep of the wall. So it's crazy. I mean, it's one of those things where you work in these facts and figures. The other reason why this executive order in particular is it's a little bit daunting to us immigrants is because it has this thing built into it which is called expedited removal. And this has been around for a while. So if you're an undocumented immigrant and you cross the border, within 2 weeks, you get caught, you get sent back right away. If you are an undocumented immigrant and you cross the border and you are within 100 miles of that border, you go back. So what they're doing now, you don't have to go through court or anything like that, it's expedited. You go back quickly. Like they don't actually have to sort of go through the whole process. So this executive order expands this to the entire United States. And it also expands this within 2 years. So this basically means that racial profiling is okay. Because if you look like an immigrant, you could be stopped for any reason by, say, a police officer or an immigration officer or a border patrol officer. And if you don't, on your person, carry proof that you've been here more than 2 years, you can actually be hauled off into a detention facility until somehow or another you prove that you've been here for more than 2 years. So it's a little scary because then this means if I'm walking down the street and I'm talking to my kids in Spanish, and if I get pulled over and if I can't actually sort of right then and there prove that I've been here for 2 years, I'm in trouble. So again, this is something that I think it has many of us very concerned.
How is that not a violation of due process?
Yeah, I know. Isn't it? Okay, so you can see why this is sort of making so many of us so nervous. It's because it is a violation of due process, and I think it isn't until you actually have enough kind of concrete cases that there'll be some pushback. But for the moment, it's actually happening. We have many cases of individuals who've been caught up in this, despite the fact that they are here legally, or they themselves are also U.S. citizens, but they can't actually prove it. So for example, if I were to ask all of you, can you show me papers to the effect that you've been here for more than 2 years? I would imagine not a single one of you could do it. So, okay, you're going to have to go home, you're going to have to go through your files, contact your bank, all that sort of stuff to kind of get it, eh? So we'll think about it. Okay, so this one also expands the capacity of detention facilities. So some of you may have heard You have a lot of detention facilities throughout the country, well, specifically around the border regions, but now throughout. So we have about 34,000 beds. And these are detention facilities for individuals who've overstayed their welcome, who've been caught up by some of the Border Patrol agents and kind of get shifted to essentially what are private prisons to await deportation. So this number is more than doubling. So that's one thing. Likewise, they want to hire more Border Patrol agents, anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 more. And I hope that in the back of your minds, you guys are sort of racking up the dollar signs here. Okay, so I should tell you that the Department of Homeland Security and the Border Patrol Agency has one of the highest rates of turnover amongst government agencies. Nobody wants to work for them. So right now, there's about 19,000 Border Patrol agents. They actually have funding for 22,000. They can't keep people. So not only are they sort of pushing to hire a lot more under an agency that doesn't actually have the ability to hire all of this, but they're also talking about lowering the expectations and the requirements for individuals to be Border Patrol agents, which is worrisome, to say the least. Okay, so, and then lastly, for this one, before I sort of move on quickly to the others, is increase of local federal partnerships. So what this means is that the Syracuse Police Department can get recruited to work de facto for Border Patrol or for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this is a little disconcerting because right now only about 16 different agencies throughout the country have agreed to be de facto Border Patrol. And this is Marshal Services, Sheriff Services, Police, I mean all sorts of law enforcement agencies. What this does is it says that everybody who works in law enforcement can now be roped in to work for immigration. So again, it's a little scary because what does this mean for the future? Okay, so this is, again, I'm spending most of my time on that first one because of what it represents to individuals such as myself. I quickly want to talk about the second one, in part because it actually brings up two issues of significance to us here in Syracuse. The first one is that it talks about sanctuary. And we have many spaces throughout the United States that are considered to be sanctuaries. Sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, sanctuary churches, sanctuary spaces. There's a broad definition of what is a sanctuary. This executive order does not define what that means. It just basically says that they will be penalized because in essence, they are causing immeasurable harm. So it's scary. And Jeff Sessions is currently, as we speak, talking about withholding federal funds from spaces, including cities that designate themselves as sanctuaries. So there's a punitive element there. The other reason why we, as faculty, are concerned is because this one talks about the fact that no immigrant group will be exempt from sort of the force of this new immigration doctrine that's sort of coming through. So many of us work with young students who were brought here by their parents when they were young kids, who've essentially been raised in the United States as Americans, who speak English, identify as themselves as Americans, who don't know their country of birth, such as Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, even Africa. And they consider themselves to be American. These are known as the DACA students, Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals. These are young kids. So it would be really punitive to kind of kick these kids and send them back, in part because they have been raised here in the United States. So for the moment, these kids are kind of, resting easy. Donald Trump actually 2 days ago came out with this phrase. For these young students, rest easy. The dreamers can rest easy. But Jeff Sessions is saying the total opposite, because just last week he deported the first one of these students. And there's several more kind of in the pipeline. And there's some lawsuits in place there. So we as faculty are concerned about what this means for our students. Okay, so there are a whole series of other executive orders, such as a travel ban, and the reason why I'm not spending any time on it is because it's actually currently caught up in the courts, so we'll see where that goes. So I'm just going to skip through that one, and we're coming up to the executive order, most recently of April 18th. And this one has two kind of complementary issues. The first one is that you hire American, and then the second one is that you buy American. So I'm not going to talk too much about the buy American because that doesn't necessarily talk about immigration, but the hire American is one that's a little kind of disconcerting because it basically means for those industries that rely on high-skilled labor coming from other parts of the world to help fill some of their gaps, they're going to see some restrictions in the amount of these high-skilled workers that they can bring to the United States. So that's, it's been a little bit worrisome in terms of kind of what's going to happen to some of these industries, such as in Silicon Valley, that have depended on this type of skilled labor to sort of move forward in terms of this very competitive field. Jamie, is there anything you wanted to add about this one? Okay.
The interesting thing is there is a shift in language, and so if you look at the section 2B, it's about creating higher wages and employment rates for workers in the United States. And that's the first time something hasn't said explicitly American workers. So it's not clear if they just weren't paying attention or if there's some softening.
Okay. So again, I could go through and basically tell you that if all undocumented folks were deported today, you're seeing about a 4.7 trillion loss over the course of 10 years for the United States. So it'd be hugely expensive. And right now we have about 11 million undocumented folks here in the United States. About 8 million of them are actually targeted for possible deportation under Trump's executive orders. And I should mention, there's sort of a current joke in Mexico right now because they expect, or they estimate that there's about 1 million undocumented Americans living in Mexico. I love it. It's so cool. Okay, so how much is this going to cost? I mean, I've sort of given you a lot of facts and figures and numbers of what this means in terms of some of the financial stuff. But I just want to talk a little bit about what the humanitarian elements of this are. And because, I mean, this is pretty catastrophic to say the least. And I do want to sort of update some of this to sort of talk about the fact that right now that we know of, the amount of women reporting domestic abuse who are in some of these very vulnerable populations of undocumented immigrants has dropped precipitously. Because believe it or not, or gone to hospitals seeking treatment for some sort of healthcare ailment of them. It's dropping precipitously because they are afraid that they will be deported. We now know that there's been several instances, especially in the South, of people who've actually been stopped at the entrances of hospitals or at the entrances of police stations or at the entrances of a court and then hauled away for deportation or dropping their kid off of school. So immigrants are sort of withdrawing from a lot of aspects of that sort of visible public sphere because they're afraid. And I think for me personally, it's actually incredibly concerning because these are very vulnerable people. So I guess we'll see where that goes.
And again, horrible violations of due process.
Exactly. And then lastly, diplomatic relations. I should tell you that some of the fallout of the failed travel bans is that right now the European community is considering imposing visa restrictions on American citizens. And this is actually felt by a number of other countries throughout the world. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So I think we're going to, Jamie, do you want to add anything?
Why don't we stop there and then
Sure.
we can talk about how to move forward.
You want to do that?
Sure.
Okay, so do you want to go next?